Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hope Beyond the Headlines, conversations that we are having at Women for Women International. My name is Marie Clarke, and I'm the Vice President of Global Programs for Women for Women. And today, I'm pleased to be joined by Aram Shakerm, who is our Country Director for our program in Iraq. So we're going to be speaking with Aram about a couple different subjects, including our work in Iraq during the COVID-19 pandemic, what it's like to be a father of two daughters as Father's Day approaches, and a little bit also about sectarianism and tensions that can happen between peoples in Iraq, since that's obviously one of the dominant headlines in the United States and in many countries growing around the world as we look at issues of systemic injustice and particularly systemic racial injustice. But let's start with you, Aram. I would love to hear you share with our audience a little bit more about yourself. So tell us your story.
Thank you very much, Mary. It's my pleasure to be on this call, and it has been my pleasure working with Women for Women for what it stands for. But basically, my life is complicated, and it has had many ups and downs. And for me, what keeps in my memory to date, vital over the last 30 years, have been the periods of time when I myself have been a refugee. Now, as we are approaching the Refugee Day in June, on June 20th, I just remember the days when I was a refugee myself, at least 3 times over the last 30 years. And it has been tough, but at the same time, during those periods of time, it has made me. And in the meantime, I have been a refugee and a receiver of aid and support from the great supporters globally. But at the same time, as part of my work in the humanitarian community, I have been on the supporting end, going and helping people. So it has been dynamic, I must say.
So here you're telling us about how you yourself 3 separate times a refugee, and now actually heading up all of Women for Women International's programming in Iraq. You've really had a journey from receiving aid to being a part of the response. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience and what you see to be true about refugees that Women for Women have been working with? Tell me a little bit, what's it like to be in a refugee camp? What are some of the give us a flavor for what that experience is.
In a refugee camp, okay, let me start with myself. In a refugee camp, I was in a 3x2 tent in the summer, and where you wait for your ration of water, ration of food, ration of blanket or whatever to survive and be protected. And if you get sick, you just need to look for the assistance, and depends on the time. One of the rounds of when I was a refugee, it was the numbers were not big and the host country was able to handle. But in the second round, we had helicopter drops of food or any aid for survival. So it depends on the scale. And I must say the scale has been big and it has been horrible, and many people lost their lives. But then bringing it to the women we are supporting and their experience, we are supporting Syrian refugee women who have left their houses since 2012 due to the Syrian conflict, and as it's not ending, they have been sitting and standing and stuck. They are stuck almost in refugee camps, which is not a tent. Some of them have been able to have some concrete walls and a plastic sheeting roof, but at the same time, for them it means they have to face harsh winters and really very hot summers. But at the same time, as the life goes on, depending on the country and the way the host communities receive you, if you are a refugee and you have an opportunity to work and you are accepted and there is no discrimination and you feel you are welcomed, it is much different. So for the refugees we are working with, they are able to work and they are able to move and they have access to services. Their children are able to go to school. But during the COVID pandemic, it means a lockdown for them. So those of them who have been able to find a job pre-COVID, they lost it. And the small savings they have, they lost it. And people are not only in refugee camps. Some of them who had a small business, they were able to rent a small house so that they have some kind of normalcy in their life. But many of them have been telling us they are unable to pay their rent now. So that's how COVID has meant for them. And the more the situation continues, the worse their situation becomes, and poverty increases among them.
So it sounds like they are really at the front lines of being affected not only by the health crisis and the pandemic, which is restricting their freedom of movement and keeping them trapped within their communities, but really feeling the brunt of the corresponding economic crisis and facing loss of income and an insecure future without the encouragement that they could have those jobs to go back to.
Exactly, yeah.
It is encouraging, however, to hear that Iraq on a whole has been a very welcoming host country in enabling them access to work. We know it looks different in every country context about how a country responds to an influx of people from outside of their borders. Do you think that as the country comes out of the pandemic and lockdowns begin to ease up, whether or not there might be particular stimulus opportunities that would help refugee populations, or is it more your expectation that the country will want to focus inwards on its own citizens and kickstarting the economy with Iraqi citizens?
I think the situation is not promising, basically because of, besides the pandemic and the risks of the pandemic, oil price has dropped and the entire market has stopped, and people are worried. Whatever savings they have, they just keep it for the bad days to come, because it's not known how soon oil price will pick up again and businesses will start again. So many businesses, especially small businesses, have lost. And that's where many refugees and internally displaced people, the people we are working with, have lost the job opportunities they have had. Some of them were working in farms, and there was a period, the golden period of time in March and April for people to go and prepare their farms. They were unable to. So they have lost 1 year. And so it is really the situation in Iraq is security and also economic, with the oil price dropping, as well as the risk of pandemic. But if markets pick up again, like any Iraqi citizen, I believe they can go back and pick their jobs again. And the contribution they are making is really very welcome by host communities, which is quite encouraging.
That is really encouraging. One of the things that we've talked about quite a bit before, and we certainly see to be true in other parts of the world, is a rise of domestic violence. And what does a woman do when her home that she's being locked in is unsafe? And I know you've talked to me before about in looking at all of the different types of humanitarian organizations, all of our allies that are out there, that one of the special contributions that we could offer in the context of COVID and in terms of recovery is to focus on violence against women. And can you speak a little bit about what you have been doing in that regard?
Yeah. We have, during this pandemic and lockdown, our staff have been in daily contact with the women we have been serving, and the encouraging message. First of all, the encouraging message we have been receiving from women is really keeps us going. Particularly when reading 70 messages to my sisters, and in those messages, how appreciative the women participants are. For the support they are getting from our supporters, particularly thinking and feeling somebody cares about them somewhere in the world means a lot for them, and that has been expressed in their letters and articulated very well. But at the same time, the COVID lockdown has meant, first of all, and a double work of unpaid work for women, because they are the ones who are caring at home and carrying the burden of preparing food, cleaning the house for an unpaid work. That has been clearly come out from the women we are working with. But at the same time, they have lost their privacy and the networking, and they don't have the luxury of talking to other women and if they have any issues. But at the same time, we have heard of many cases of violence against women increasing. And what has been really quite encouraging, not only the women we are serving have been able to reach out to our team, ask for support, but at least one case I can talk about. One of our participants has extended support to one of her neighbors who experienced violence. That has been quite encouraging and rewarding and keeps us going.
And that is just absolutely critical in a time when we might feel quite socially distant. Ways that we can come together and support one another to get through this crisis is just, I think, is one of the things that keeps people a bit sane in this context. I was wondering if you could say just a little bit more, what's really needed now the most for people who are watching? What are some of the types of actions that they can take to support refugees, to support women in Iraq more broadly at this time?
Well, at this time, as the situation is getting more complicated and poverty is increasing, and the refugees have lost their hopes to go back, particularly the Syrian refugees, as the conflict in Syria is not ending. So really the support that have been provided by our supporters is appreciated and needs to continue so that we can continue supporting this woman. And I'm sure as the situation is going and poverty level is increasing, which already has been doubled since March, the need for our program is much more wider and in the communities that we have not yet explored and worked.
So we need to raise resources so that we can really fuel the change.
Exactly.
And not only support the Syrian communities, but also expand this holistic approach that we have all of the data to prove has an incredible transformative impact for the women. I think that's incredible. You know, I'm thinking about the context, the headlines that we're living through right now in the US and in other parts of the world that's really looking at, you know, systemic injustices and particularly racism. But when I think of the Iraq context, often what comes in the headlines is often by people who are not Iraqi, is this presentation of Iraq as a country that's really torn apart and divided by sectarianism or across religious lines more broadly. And yet I have heard from you before and some of our other allies that this is actually a really deep misrepresentation of what it's like to be in Iraq. And I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to that and set the record straight.
Okay, honestly, Iraq is what we have felt proud of as an Iraqi has been the richness of the country and the diversity of the country that is made of different religious backgrounds, Muslims, Christians, Yazidis, Kakais, Sabias, and everyone. It's a big list. And then different nationalities, Arab, Turkmen, Kurd, and so on, you name it. Iraq has, and people have been living and continue to live together, and there are intra-marriage, and the people, especially in the contested areas in Iraq, I have been speaking with different nationalities, different religious backgrounds. They say, if some of the greedy politicians leave us in peace, we have no issues against each other. So it is sometimes the manipulation that some politicians do it for their own benefit. Otherwise, people really love each other and have continued, and they continue even during the peak of the conflict. They have continued to take each other and support each other.
You know, it's so encouraging to hear. I feel like it offers an opportunity for us to reflect as a global community and learn actually from the people of Iraq about what it is like to build out unity and to support each other. And I wonder how much of that also contributes to Iraq being such a welcoming host country for refugees, that temptation to really bring people together in unity and celebrate your diversity, as opposed to tearing communities apart. So I think that's exciting.
I think one contributing factor to that is every Iraqi who is living on the land now has been a refugee or displaced over the last 30 years.
Wow.
So we have seen it, we have been supported, and that support is being returned. And every Iraqi of 40 million people, I can tell you,
Wow.
no one has not experienced that. So that is a big contributing factor, that in the end, without other people's support that you don't know, you wouldn't be able to overcome the crisis. So people alone cannot do it. That's why the global community support to refugees continues to be appreciated and needed to continue.
Thank you. That is such a powerful thing to think on. That idea that an entire population has at one point or another been displaced, and what that means for how they think about global support and supporting one another. So maybe getting just a bit more personal, bringing us back to your own experience. So how are you coping? And the place that you have lived has gone through sort of rolling, really deep lockdowns. And so how are you managing? How do you stay grounded?
Oh, the longer it has continued, so I have been able to create a routine for myself, including, keeping my physical exercises early morning, and then create a work routine, communicating with my team members, talking with everyone, and then having tea breaks. And so it has been I have been able to keep the work going at the same time, keep my physical and mental health continuing. Yeah.
Well done. That's
Yeah.
fabulous. And then we keep you up late at night calling you from Washington and having these types of calls.
Yeah.
Also speak to me, Father's Day is on the rise, also in June coming up. Here in the US, we celebrate our fathers, and you are a father of 2 daughters. So share with me what your hopes are for the future, their future, and for their future of women more broadly.
Well, for my daughters, together with my wife, we proudly say they have made their own future just based on the space and the environment we have created for them, including the education, the best available education we have provided to them. So their future is now in their hands. And as a father, that's what I feel proud of, especially in a community where women really need to have a space to have a voice, and to be able, even the kind of dress they are dressing and the future they decide, they need to consult a male member. So in that context, I just feel my daughters are ready for their future, and they are making their own decisions. That's what I feel proud of. And at the same time, for the women of the world, what I feel, if women rule countries and rule the world for just 1 year, 2 years, I believe there will be peace. There will be more peace than the wars we have today. And it is time to test it globally.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I would love to see the future women leaders of Iraq and how they would build an even stronger nation, an even more peaceful region. It's absolutely the mission that we're working for. It is so great, Aram, to speak to you. It's always inspiring to hear what you and your team are doing. It's always inspiring to hear your story. As a leader in this, I think that this arc of going from being yourself displaced to leading this organization in Iraq is just such a powerful story in and of itself. And I'm sure your daughters are really proud of their daddy on this Father's Day and all the things that you have done. And my hope is that those of you who have been watching have been able to be also inspired by Aram, that some of the things that he has shared about the experience of Syrian refugees and the experience of Iraqi people having been all themselves at one point or another displaced and dependent on aid has touched you in your life, and that this will be an opportunity for you to get involved and to engage with us and support us as we move forward to try and support refugee populations throughout the world who are so disproportionately at risk of not only the impact of the pandemic in terms of the health crisis, but also the economic crisis. So we hope you will join us in those efforts. Thank you, Aram.
Thank you, Mary. And really, I would like to once again thank our supporters for the great support they have provided us and for us to be able to continue work. Thank you.
Thank you. Until next time.
Thank you.
Inshallah.